Hey, Steve Campbell, host of the One Big Thing podcast. I'm about to show you a clip of a video that's a passion project of mine. Through the podcast, I developed my own community called the Overflow. The Overflow is men from all over the country that admit that they don't have a sense of community in their life. We gather for 30 minutes together to get grounded in God's Word and to share a message that resonates with our hearts. Usually I'm the person that leads the group, but every once in a while I have a podcast guest that I've recorded with come on and share a message. And in this 26-minute clip that you're about to watch, this is my buddy Jake Kauffman, who shared about what we actually talked about in his upcoming episode, which is what happens when disaster strikes your life as a Christian. How do you make sense of it? So this idea of how do you suffer well. So I want to give you an inside look as to what our community is all about. If you're a man passionately pursuing Jesus and would love to join a community like this, please get in touch. Again, this group is called the Overflow. We meet every Friday at noon Eastern time on Zoom. You can send me an email or get in touch with me through one of my social media channels. Yeah, I would love to get you plugged in. But again, enjoy this clip, How Do You Suffer Well, with my good buddy, Jake Kauffman.
If you're familiar with the passage, I imagine most of you are. It's found in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9 through 10. And it goes like this. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. In weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. It is the ultimate paradox that flies right over the head of the ego, that we give it away to keep it. We suffer to get well. We die to live. And what I want to propose today is, as a collective, especially as men in this day and age, we find ourselves on kind of the precipice of an up level, which really serves as an invitation into deeper purpose, deeper relationship with God, with others. It is the age of authenticity, right? I imagine, and raise your hand if this resonates, that what you believe about politics, about the world, about what you grew up being taught has been severely brought into question over the last few years. Raise your hand if that's true for you. Yeah, right. As a collective, we are transitioning through what a lot of spiritual teachers refer to as liminal space. Raise your hand if you're familiar. Anybody? I'm going to read you a passage about it here in just a moment, but to summarize it succinctly, it is the exact space that Paul refers to in the 2 Corinthians verse I just read. Right? Weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. I might suggest that it is the only space in which transformation, growth, spiritual refinement, if you will, is possible. Everything else is just kind of confirmation of the old familiar pattern. But the truth is that in order to keep a man growing, you have to introduce disorder. Disorder. I don't know anyone on this call aside from Steve, but I imagine, given that you're here this morning, you are wrestling with something, whether it be your job status, whether it be your financial situation, whether it be your marriage, whether it be your relationship with your kids. Maybe it's just your relationship with yourself and your potential. Like you feel like you're meant for more, but you're not really sure how to access that, how to unlock that. Raise your hand if this is resonating with you, or if you feel like on some level that's true for you. Awesome. Cool. So I grew up feeling the same way. A little background about me: I was raised in the Christian evangelical church. I was sexually abused when I was around 12 years old. And as you can probably imagine, that kind of served as a catalyst for how I came to perceive myself. And it created a series of, and I didn't have language for this at the time, but a series of self-limiting beliefs, unconscious biases about myself, other people, and the world that held me back from really performing at my best and allowing me to be as successful as, like, deep down I knew I was capable of being, right? But there was that cognitive dissonance, right? That resistance that kept coming up for me whenever I tried to, like, assert myself in a really powerful way or take a risk, pursue my dreams, go after that job that I really wanted. The unfortunate thing is that the religious environment that I found myself in, and I imagine some of you can relate to this, it was much more about form than substance. It was much more about right thinking and doctrine than transformation. Most churches, and this is not a judgment, this is not a condemnation. I think most churches are very, very well intended. Um, but they are stuck in what I would refer to as first stage morality, where salvation is much more about sin avoided as opposed to sin forgiven. Now, it's important that we, right, learn the rules, do this, don't do that. But if we kind of stay stuck in that phase or that stage of psychological development, spiritual development, it doesn't really stand up to suffering. And so I imagine on some inherent level, all of you are here, like I mentioned, because you're navigating difficulty. That's just the nature of life, right? Life is hard. Wear a helmet, right? And if you're growth minded, like I am, like Steve is, the irony in that, if you're striving for growth, if you're pursuing the next level, whether that's in career and business, or whether that's with your physical fitness, or just like your relationship to self, it really doesn't matter. The irony is that you're constantly going to be plateauing. You're constantly going to be experiencing growing pains. That's just the nature of growth. Because in order to grow, what must we do? We have to break free from our comfort zone. So, right, what do we do? Because when it comes to therapy, and even most religious teachers, they're really just teaching men how to cope. And however unintentionally, how to solve for their pain, get out of hardship and suffering, when in reality, growth, and I would suggest your next level, requires something very different in this stage of life. It requires that you sit down in the space of suffering, of hardship, and you allow yourself to be burned and refined by those things. Which is why, if you're familiar with, anyone familiar with the 12-step program? You don't have to raise your hand if you've been through one. Even if you haven't, I highly recommend that you study the 12 steps, because the first three can succinctly be summarized in this way: I can't, God can, so let God. But the great spiritual teachers of old and AA, they both propose that life's two greatest teachers are great love and great suffering. And if you know great love, or if you've known great love, well, then you know great suffering. So it pretty much just boils down to great suffering. Or in the words of Bill Plotkin, it really just comes down to your capacity to experience pain. Not glamorizing it whatsoever, but that's just the reality, especially for men today, right? We're being slowly robbed from by debasement and inflation, which is kind of like a whole other conversation. Masculinity is inherently being attacked or made wrong, right? We're being told that we shouldn't assert ourselves, that on some inherent level, it represents hostility as opposed to just, a natural part of being a man. But as it pertains to liminal space, I'll go back to that because the central drama in every man's life is the internal battle that he fights against his own weaknesses. It's just that we've been taught to kind of hide those weaknesses, right? Perform over top of them. Let me optimize for my faith, family, fitness, finances. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but when you dig into the unconscious intention or motivation beneath it, what you find is most men are not actually in pursuit of something, they're actually running away from something. All of you here are being called on some inherent level, otherwise you wouldn't be here, into a new season, into becoming a more authentic, fully expressed, courageous version of you. Like I mentioned, you wouldn't be here if on some level you didn't feel that. If you weren't connected with this notion that God, has more for my life than what I'm currently living, right? He can use me. The issue with that, if that he's going to use you, first he has to break you. And he does that through liminal space. Jonah in the belly of the whale is the best biblical analogy that I can provide for what does that look like practically speaking, right? He spent 3 days and 3 nights in darkness, not knowing, am I going to live? Am I going to make it out of this? I imagine some of you are experiencing something similar. Maybe it's with regard to your career. Maybe you got laid off. Maybe you're not making enough money to keep up with the bills and you're just watching, right, your debt pile up. You wouldn't be alone if that were the case, especially if you begin to look at the average debt that the average household is carrying. But liminal space. Liminality is an inner state and sometimes an outer situation where people can begin to think and act in genuinely new ways. It is when we are betwixt and between. We have left one room. We have left our old life, but we have not yet fully entered into the next room and our new life. Any hiatus between stages of life, stages of faith, jobs, loves, or relationships. It is that graced time when we are not certain, we are not in control. This is when something genuinely new can happen. We are empty, receptive, an erased tablet waiting for new words. Nothing fresh or creative will normally happen when we are inside of our self-constructed comfort zones. Only more of the same. Nothing original emerges from business as usual. It seems we need some anti-structure, disorder, to give new direction, new depth, and new purpose to our regular structure. Otherwise, Structure, which is needed in the first half of life, tends to become a prison as we grow older. Much of the work of the biblical God and human destiny itself is to get people into liminal space, not out of it, and to keep them there long enough to learn something essential and genuinely new. It is the ultimate teachable space. In some sense, it is the only teachable space. So much so that many spiritual giants try to live their entire lives inside of liminality. They try to live on the margins and on the periphery of the system so they will not get sucked into its illusions and payoffs. The Bible calls this being in the world but not of the world. They know it is the only position that ensures continued wisdom, even broader perspective, and even deeper compassion. Why does this matter? Why should you care? And what should you take away from this? Right? It is our ego, right? The part of your psyche, not ego as an arrogance, but the part of your psyche that is designed to maintain the status quo, that labels events, situations, circumstances as hard, as difficult, as bad, as uncomfortable. If you're familiar with Ram Dass, he once said that the recognition of suffering is a threat to the stability of the ego. So I say that to say, regardless of what you are going through, regardless of what season of life you are in, regardless of what transition you are currently navigating, right? In the words of Paul, for the sake of Christ, then I am content in my weakness, with insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Suffering is the greatest catalyst for transformation, gentlemen. My encouragement, be with it, be in it, learn from it, see it as a teacher, share it. If you're familiar with the work of Brene Brown, she's an expert. She was the first person in the US to do her dissertation on shame. And she says that shame needs three things to thrive: secrecy, silence, and judgment. So when you show up to groups like this, the more you share it and the more you expand into vulnerability and your willingness to be vulnerable, so too will you expand into your next season and your next level of leadership.
Hey Jake, can you you and I talked about it on the episode yesterday. You talked about the 4 Ds that usually
Hmm.
God will allow to transpire that I think we
Yep.
struggle with. What did I do wrong? But can you cover those 4 Ds and see if it resonates with
Oh,
this
yeah,
group?
yeah, yeah. Very succinctly, I could talk about this for 2 hours, but I believe it was Carl Jung who first talked about the two halves of life. The first half of life is all about individuation and self-actualization, making something of yourself. For men, this looks like pursuing accomplishment, success, achievement. The second half of life is about transformation and transcendence, where we are put on the path towards a higher purpose and a higher power, where it becomes no longer about us. Now, most men are somewhat initiated into this when they become fathers, because they're met with the realization that, like, oh, my life is not about me. However, they don't really know how to, like, kind of navigate from the first half of life to the second half of life. All they know is, if I don't take care of this thing, it's going to die. But what do I do about, like, this internal shift that is occurring? And how do I navigate these competing feelings, right? The loss of my freedom, right? In terms of restriction, not being held back by anything, and move into the freedom of capacity where I'm tied down to something or someone. The thing that allows you to cross over, to go from the first half of life to the second half of life, is necessary suffering, where you have to be met by a struggle that is bigger than you. And this typically takes the form of either death, disease, divorce, or disaster. If this hasn't happened to you yet, and you are committed to self-growth, and you're going to therapy, you're hiring a coach, you're going to workshops, et cetera, et cetera. Reading and podcasts are only going to take you so far. Not saying you shouldn't do those things, but that's just a warm up. If you're truly committed to a life of self growth and you're actively in pursuit of those things, maybe it's just you're meeting with a counselor, a pastor, an elder at your local church. I promise you that will find you. You will not have to go in pursuit of it. It will find you. When it does, it will feel, especially to your ego, which is a part of you, but not the real you, like you're doing something wrong, like you made a mistake, you messed up. But I promise you, you didn't. In fact, you're doing it very, very right. The best thing that you can do in that moment is to surrender to the suffering, just like Jonah was forced to do in the belly of the whale, and wait.
Jake, you and I talked about that yesterday because what's wild about the episode is, Jake and we get on the call right before we record, and I'm like, dude, what's your one big thing? And, he shares something with me. And then if you podcast, Shure mics are some of the best mics you can use. And after I passed it off to Jake, I could tell his Shure mic wasn't on, and so I like stopped it. And I was like, dude, we got to redo that, and I need you to turn your mic back on. So he did it, and then when we got to his one big thing, he goes, "Hey, the Holy Spirit just redirected my one big thing. I hope this is okay." And then started saying that my one big thing is all about supernatural provision. And like it hit me like a ton of bricks, right? And so I'm like, all right, it's apparently the conversation we're supposed to have. And so it's wild that that morphed into, I think whenever you experience one of those four D's that he talked about, the immediate thought is, Lord, did I miss it? But what he and I talked about is if you had read my prayer journal back in May or June, my heart's desire was, God, I want to be used by you. Like, use me. And then disaster struck. And then it's like, it's not what I asked for. Like, I wanted you to use me. And in the last 2.5 months, many of you guys know because I talk with you pretty confidentially, I've been more broken and more humbled than I've ever been in my life. I've been crying more than I've ever cried because it's like, Lord, what did I do wrong? And in the midst of those four D's, disaster, divorce, death, discomfort, whatever it may be, as Jake and I talked about yesterday, the other D that's come out of that is dependence. And the only two words that I've learned how to say these last 2.5 months are I yield. That ego has completely died. Lord, I've had money, I've lost money, I've had careers, I've lost careers. At this point, I yield. Whatever you want to do, do it. And it's been this wild spiritual adventure, like Brett talked about last week, for those of us that were on. I don't have all the answers, but God has continually showed up and just keep saying, Lakin, do you trust me? And I think to what Jake's point is we're all here because we're self-motivated. We can get ourselves out of most situations, whether it's talking our way out, figuring our way out, moving resources, bank accounts, investment account, like we can figure that out. But there comes a certain point where the obstacle, the season in front of you is so freaking big that you can't do it. And it's literally humbling to sit before the Lord when scripture really, really comes alive and say, Lord, not my will, but yours. Like, what are we doing? What's the plan? Especially when you're leading a family, especially when you're married, especially when the roles and responsibilities, and they could be good things. Travis, we talked about like what you're doing is a good thing, but it's overwhelming. And it doesn't always have to be you have a zeroed out bank account or you lost your job. It could be navigating good things. But as men, we can't learn to lead from the overflow in our life if we aren't first broken in such a way that my heart is, Lord, I want people to see you. And I'm too stupid. I make it about me way too much. And so, as Jake and I talked about yesterday, if you would have pulled back the curtain in June and showed me what the next several months of my life were going to be like, I would have never signed up for it. But there is something that has happened. I met Jay because Travis said, you got to meet my dude. I've met many of you through this because, as Jake said, I don't know what else to do other than share what God's doing in me. And it's not always the glory story. It's like, dude, I'm lost. And Travis is like, hey, I got a couple people I need you to meet. I'm like, okay. You know what I mean? There's the two D's that I think we need to learn how to rest in is desperation and dependence. And so I think it's very easy with podcasts and men's group and coaching to push hard, to show up first, to leave last, to give it all on the field and all of that. But I think for some of us, we've just been in a very long season. We've been trying that. And so if you find yourself in a situation where it's so big, whatever it is for you, relational, financial, physical, it could be a spouse that's sick, a child that's wayward, whatever it is. What's been crazy to me is, as Jake talked about sexual abuse, like there are certain things that we as men need to wrestle with. And Jay, I'll come to you in 1 second. This is where Jake and I left the conversation at the end yesterday. We can seek each other on a call like this and hey guys, pray for me. And there's a space for that. Like we need to have community and brotherhood and have men lifting you up. There are books we can read. That's good. We should do that. But there is an intimacy that comes from, for me, getting up in the morning when there's nothing going on and just sitting in Jesus's presence and saying, I yield. What are you gonna do? Where are we going? And he just says, do you trust me? And so I love you guys because we carry a lot. But if you felt like, dude, I don't know what I'm doing, join the club. But get ready because God's going to use you in a way you could have never imagined that second half of life that Jake just talked about. So I think coming back to what Brett talked about, it's not waiting on the Lord if it's this or that. It's both and, it's us moving the ball forward, but also trusting that God will open those doors. So